My 67 is an age when many enjoy well-deserved vacations, grandchildren, and hobbies put on hold. I, on the other hand, am still living my daughter's life, not my own. For 35 years now, I have existed in that strange space between love and exhaustion. Fullerton welcomes the morning grudgingly. The sun slowly rises over the horizon, coloring the walls of my bedroom a soft pink. Adeline sleeps in the next room, the same room where her childhood and adolescence passed, though she's 38 now. Quietly, trying not to creak the old floorboards, I make my way to the kitchen. I make coffee my usual, Adeline's with cream and 3 spoonfuls of sugar. She's had a sweet tooth since she was a little girl. I remember denying myself everything to buy her better candy. Her father left when she was 3, and it's been just the two of us against the world ever since. At least that's how I saw it. You're rattling around in there again first thing in the morning. Adeline's disgruntled voice shatters the morning silence. She appears in the kitchen with a sleep-dampened face, tucking in my old robe. She'd lost hers long ago, as she'd lost most of her things. I'm sorry, honey. I wanted to make you coffee before you woke up. Jesus, 8 in the morning. She slumps back in her chair, rubbing her temples. My head is pounding. I silently place a cup of coffee and 2 painkiller pills in front of her. She came home late last night, smelling of alcohol and other people's cigarettes. I stopped asking where she was a long time ago. It always ended in a fight. Your favorite coffee, and avocado toast in 5 minutes. I don't want toast, she wrinkles her nose. Tell me, did you pay the internet bill? It was slow again last night. Yes, honey, I did. Out of your monthly lodging payment. I smile, trying to make a joke. It's our little game. Adeline hasn't contributed to the housekeeping money in a long time. I stopped asking. She's always having trouble with her job, always having some kind of crisis and unexpected expenses. She used to be a talented graphic designer, but after several failed projects and conflicts with her bosses, she's been doing freelance work that barely covers her own needs. Ha ha, Adeline replies without a smile. Very funny, especially since I brought 3 clients to your accounting firm last month. And I really appreciate it. I hastily agree. Since retiring 2 years ago, I've kept up the bookkeeping for several small companies. It's a supplemental income to my modest pension, and more importantly, it keeps my mind sharp. Adeline sips her coffee and wrinkles her nose. It's too hot and not enough sugar. I take the cup back and add another spoonful of sugar, even though I remember exactly that I put in 3, as I always do. It's part of our ritual, too. She's always dissatisfied. I'm always trying to remedy the situation. 35 years of care and love, which is never enough. Adeline's phone vibrates on the table. She flinches, stares at the screen, and I notice her face change, the same hunted beast expression I've been seeing more and more often in recent weeks. Is something wrong? I ask cautiously. Nothing. She abruptly grabs the phone, rejecting the call. It's just spam. That's the 3rd spam this morning, I remark. And there were a few calls last night, too. God, are you following me? She snaps at me. I'm 38. I'm a grown man. I raise my hands in a conciliatory gesture. Of course, honey. I'm just worried. She snorts and goes off to her room, leaving the unfinished coffee on the table. A couple minutes later, I hear the front door slam. Adeline's gone without even saying goodbye. Nothing new. As I clear the table, I remember what Adeline was like as a child. Bright, talented, enthusiastic. She drew beautifully, and I believed she had a great future ahead of her. All the teachers spoke of her talent. I worked 2 jobs to pay for her art school, then college. I denied myself everything, wore old clothes, saved money on food. But Adeline always got the best. When she started having problems with her first job, I supported her mentally and financially. When she decided to move into her own apartment, I helped her with the down payment, and when after 2 years she couldn't pay for it, I sold my modest jewelry to help her. In the end, Adeline still had to move back to her parents' house, but even then I didn't reproach her with a word. Perhaps it was my mistake. Perhaps I wanted too much to compensate for my father's absence, and as a result, I raised a man who thinks the world owes him. Or, as my late mother used to say, spoiled the girl beyond belief. But what could I do? After Richard left, Adeline had been everything to me, the only light, the only joy, the only meaning. The phone rings, interrupting my thoughts. It's Esther, my old friend and neighbor. Laurel, honey, have you seen any strange people around your house by any chance? She asks without preamble. What kind of people? I walk over to the window, looking out into the street. Last night, when I was walking Pixie, I saw two stout men in black. They were standing in front of your house, obviously waiting for something. They looked pretty scary. I felt a chill run down my spine. No, I didn't. But Adeline was home late, so maybe they were friends of hers. It's not like they were her friends. Esther's voice is quieter, as if she's afraid of being overheard. One of them was on the phone, and as I walked by, I overheard the phrase, "There's no more time. We need to get tough." Laurel, honey, is your Adeline in trouble? I don't know, I answered honestly, but I'll find out. After my conversation with Esther, I've been worried all day. I try to call Adeline, but she doesn't pick up. By late afternoon, I'm ready to call the hospitals when I hear the sound of a key in the lock. Adeline enters, drops her bag on the nightstand, and walks straight into the kitchen. I follow her, noting the unaccustomed pallor of her face and trembling hands. Adeline, what's going on? Esther saw some men watching the house. You old hag, Adeline explodes, always sticking her nose in. They were my colleagues. We're working on a new project. Colleagues don't cause such fear, I say quietly, taking her hand. And then I notice the bruises on her wrist, distinct finger marks, as if someone had grabbed her hard. Oh my God, what is that? She pulls her arm out. I hit it when I was moving equipment in the studio. Adeline, those are finger marks. Someone grabbed you. Mom, stop it. She's raising her voice. Stop interfering in my life. Everything's perfectly all right. But in her eyes, I see something I've rarely seen. Real fear. Adeline was never a coward. She always threw herself into any adventure head first, without thinking of the consequences. And seeing her like this scared, hunted, is more frightening to me than all the strange phone calls and suspicious people outside the house. Honey, I say softly, whatever happens, we can handle it. Tell me, please, I'm on your side. For a moment, she seems ready to open up. Something akin to relief flashes in her eyes, as if the heavy load she's been carrying alone can finally be shared. But then her phone vibrates again, and the moment is gone. It's okay, Mom. Really. She fakes a smile that turns out crooked and unnatural. It's just a lot of work, and the customer is very demanding. The customer leaves bruises on your hands? I'm not backing down. I told you, hit. She goes into a screaming fit. God, why don't you ever believe me? Adeline runs out of the kitchen, leaving me alone with my troubled thoughts. I hear her slam the door of her room loudly, and then she starts talking quietly but intensely on the phone with someone. Something is going on, something serious, and my daughter is in trouble. I know this for a fact. In 35 years of motherhood, I've learned to sense when something is wrong with her. Only this time, my gut tells me that the problems are much more serious than usual. I stand outside the door to her room, trying to make out words through the muffled sobs. Separate phrases come to me. I can't. Just a little more time. I'll find the money. Please don't. I'm caught in a daze. Money. Of course it's about money. Adeline has always had problems with her finances, but judging by her tone, this time it's much more serious than the usual overdue loan. I return to the kitchen and sit down at the table, wrapping my arms around my head. What can I do? My savings aren't that great. My pension is modest. There is the house, the only truly valuable possession I have left after all these years spent caring for my daughter. The house I had planned to leave Adeline as an inheritance, though she never seemed to appreciate it. A knock on the door interrupts the flow of thoughts. Adeline has left again without even saying goodbye. I go to the window and see her walking quickly down the street, looking around as if she's afraid of being followed. In that moment, I make a decision. Tomorrow, I'm going to make her tell the truth, no matter what it takes. Because more than anything, I'm afraid of losing my daughter, even if she hasn't appreciated my love in a long time. All the next day, I waited for Adeline with a heavy heart. She didn't come home for the night, didn't answer her phone, and I spent a sleepless night at the window, cringing at every passing car. By noon, fatigue took its toll. I dozed off in my chair and was awakened by the insistent ringing of the doorbell. Two men stood on the doorstep, one tall with short-cropped hair and a square chin, the other squat, with a scar across his left eyebrow, both wearing dark jackets despite the warm weather. "Mrs. Hollister?" the tall one asked. "We're looking for Adeline. Is she home?" Something in their eyes made me wary. "No, she didn't spend the night at home. Who are you?" "Friends," the tall one answered with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Tell him Vince stopped by. Tell her she has 28 days left." He turned to leave, but his partner lingered, giving me an appraising look. "Nice house," he said. "It'd be a shame if anything happened to it. Or you." They were gone before I could say anything. With trembling hands, I locked the door and leaned against the wall, trying to keep my heart from racing. These people weren't Adeline's co-workers. They were dangerous, and for the first time, I realized how serious my daughter's problems could be. An hour later, while I was still trying to reach Adeline, she showed up on my doorstep, eyes puffy from crying, clothes wrinkled, looking like she'd spent the night on someone's couch. "Where have you been? I was going crazy with worry." I pulled her into the house. "Some people came by here looking for you. One called himself Vince, and—" Adeline turned pale and sank to the floor in the hallway. "They came here to see you?" Her voice shook. God, what have I done? I sank down beside her, put my arm around her shoulders. "Honey, please tell me what's going on. Who are these people? Why are you afraid of them?" Adeline burst into tears, tucked into my shoulder, just like when she was a little girl, when she'd been hurt by other kids or had her knees smashed. Only she wasn't 5 years old now, and the problems were more serious than the abrasions. I owed them money, Mom. A lot of money. For what? I lifted her face up by her chin, looking into her eyes. Drugs? No. She shook her head. Card debt. Yeah. I used to gamble. At first, just for fun, with friends. Then I found an underground casino not far from here in the industrial district. I was winning at first, but then, she cried again. "How much do you owe?" My voice sounded unnaturally calm. $230,000, she said. The room swam before my eyes. $230,000. It was a colossal sum more than I'd earned in the last few years. God, Adeline, how could you owe that much? I tried to pay it back, she said through her sobs. I borrowed, I lost again. Then I borrowed from them. Vince, he runs this casino, but I lost that money too. Alone? In an underground casino? I couldn't believe my ears. Do you realize what this means? This isn't a bank, Adeline. It's criminals. I know. She was almost screaming. You think I don't realize what I've done? They gave me a month to return the money. It's been 2 days. If I don't pay up, they say they'll break my arms. They said it's hard for a designer to work with broken fingers. I was overcome with a wave of terror. My daughter, my Adeline, in danger because of my own stupidity. Stupidity that I may have nurtured by my boundless support and indulgence. Do you have any money? Any at all? I asked. She shook her head. I spent it all. My credit line, too. I thought maybe you could. I grinned bitterly. What, Adeline? Lend you $250,000? Where do you think I got that kind of money? There's a house, she said quietly, not looking me in the eye. It could be sold. It's worth over 300,000, isn't it? We'll pay off the debt and use the rest of the money to rent an apartment. I recoiled as if she'd hit me. Are you suggesting I sell our house? The house where you grew up, where I spent my whole life? What am I supposed to do? She started crying again. They'll kill me, Mom, or maim me. These aren't ordinary creditors. I got to my feet, feeling my knees shake, and walked to the kitchen. Poured myself some water, trying to gather my thoughts. The house was my only serious asset, my fortress, a place with so many memories. I'd bought it 30 years ago, when Adeline was still a baby, paying off the mortgage, saving for everything. I felt like these walls protected us from the world. And now, this house was going to pay for my daughter's recklessness. You really don't see any other way out? I asked when Adeline entered the kitchen. I've been looking for a job. She sank into a chair. But no one would pay me that much for a month. I thought about getting a bank loan, but with my credit history, I tried borrowing from friends, but they don't have that kind of money. What about the police? I suggested it. Are you crazy? She looked at me like I was crazy. It's an underground casino, Mom. I went there willingly. I gambled willingly. Yes, they give out illegal loans, but if I go to the police, they'll find a way to retaliate. People like that have long arms. I closed my eyes. She was right, of course. People like that weren't to be trifled with. All right, I said quietly. I'll sell the house. Adeline breathed out a sigh of relief and threw her arms around me. Thank you, Mommy. I knew you wouldn't leave me. Her joy cut me to the heart. Did she not realize the sacrifice I was about to make? Or was she just used to me always solving her problems, no matter what it cost me? The process of selling the house began the next day. I contacted the realtor, explaining that I needed to get the deal done as quickly as possible. That meant selling below market price, but we had no choice. Time was working against us. Every day of preparing the house for sale was a little death for me. I sorted through the things I had accumulated over 3 decades, deciding what I could take with me into the unknown future and what I would have to leave behind. Old photographs, Adeline's childhood drawings, letters, mementos. Every little thing triggered a flood of memories. Here is the teddy bear I gave Adeline for her 5th birthday. Here are her first watercolor drawings, which her teacher called outstanding for that age. A collection of sea pebbles from our one and only trip to the coast when Adeline was 10. School awards, diplomas, greeting cards. The story of a lifetime packed into cardboard boxes. Adeline barely participated in the process. She would only show up at home to change clothes or eat, and then disappear again. I didn't know where she spent her time, but I hoped at least she wasn't going back to that damn casino. 2 weeks later, we had a buyer, a young couple with a small child. They were thrilled with the house, especially the spacious backyard with the apple tree I planted the year we moved here. Seeing their happy faces, I tried to console myself with the thought that the house would at least go to good people who would fill it with new life and new memories. The deal was done quickly. The buyers agreed to an expedited process in exchange for a small discount. In the end, the house went for $310,000, enough to cover Adeline's debt and leave some for the first time after the move. I spent the evening before the paperwork was finalized, wandering through the rooms, saying goodbye to every corner. This is where Adeline took her first steps. This is where we celebrated her 16th birthday. By this window, I sat waiting for her to return from her first date. This kitchen is where we cooked Sunday dinners together until she was too old and busy for family traditions. I touched the walls as if they could absorb my sadness and preserve a piece of me for future occupants. Tears ran down my cheeks, but I didn't try to hold them back. No one could see my grief. Adeline didn't spend the night at home again. On the day of signing the papers, she finally showed up unusually focused, with a business notebook in her hands. For the first time in weeks, I saw glimpses of the determined girl she'd once been. "I've already looked at a few apartments," she said as we drove to the realtor's office. "There's a nice two-bedroom near the center. It's a little pricey, but it's in a good neighborhood." "Sounds good," I nodded, trying not to think about the fact that we just lost a nice house in a quiet suburb for a nice two-bedroom. The signing of the papers went by like a blur. I automatically signed where the realtor indicated, answered questions, shook hands. All this time, a part of me remained in that house, among the ghosts of the past. When all the formalities were completed, the realtor shook my hand. "Congratulations on a successful transaction, Mrs. Hollister. The money will be deposited into your account within 3 business days." I nodded, unable to find the words. What a strange congratulations with the loss of everything that was truly precious to me. Adeline and I walked outside. It was a clear, sunny day, so inappropriately joyous for an event that was breaking my heart. "That's it," Adeline said with relief. "Now, when the money comes in, I'll pay Vince back right away, and we can start over. Right, Mom?" I looked at her happy, carefree face, as if it were a simple change of decor, not the loss of a house that had been home for most of our lives. "Yes," I answered quietly. "A new one. I had a week to clear the house for the new owners, 7 days to pack away 30 years of memories, 7 days to say goodbye." Adeline helped me with the packing, but I could see her thoughts were far away. She constantly checked her phone, as if expecting an important message, and often went out for personal calls. Finally, the money arrived in my account. That same day, Adeline asked me to transfer the necessary amount to her account. "I'll handle Vince," she said. "You shouldn't get involved." Something in her tone made me wary, but I suppressed my doubts. After all, it was her mistake, and she should be the one to fix it. I transferred $230,000 to her account, keeping $80,000 for myself, all that was left of my dream house. "Thank you, Mom." Adeline hugged me. "You saved my life, literally." There was such relief written all over her face that for a moment I felt like all the sacrifices hadn't been in vain. My little girl was safe. That's all that mattered. The next day, Adeline told me that she had found the perfect apartment and had already put down a deposit. "You'll love it, Mom," she said. "It's bright, with a big kitchen, just the way you like it, and it has a little balcony where you can grow flowers." I smiled faintly as I pictured our new humble abode. Not a house, of course, but we'd be together. We'd be fine. Moving day came all too quickly. The trucking company picked up our boxes and the furniture we'd decided to keep, mostly my stuff, since Adeline said the new apartment already had almost everything we needed. Those words gave me a vague unease, but I pushed it away. Too many worries over the last month. I walked through the empty rooms one last time, listening to the echo of my footsteps. Every corner, every crack in the wall was familiar and dear. In this house, I was happy, despite all the hardships of being a single mother. In this house, I watched my daughter grow from a little girl into a woman, sometimes difficult, sometimes thankless, but always loved. "Mom, are you coming?" Adeline's voice snapped me out of my musings. She was standing at the front door, tapping her foot impatiently. The cab's been waiting 10 minutes. Coming. I looked around one last time, remembering the house as it was empty, ready for new tenants, but still holding a piece of my soul. All the way to my new apartment, Adeline was unusually animated. She talked about the neighborhood, how there was a good grocery store, a park, and even a small library nearby. "You're going to love it, Mom," she repeated. "The apartment is really nice." I nodded, trying to share her enthusiasm. After all, one had to look for the positives. We're together, we're safe, and we have a roof over our heads. Not bad. The cab pulled up outside a modern apartment complex, clearly not cheap, judging by the well-maintained grounds and the security guards at the entrance. "Here?" I couldn't hide my surprise. "Adeline, can we afford it?" "Don't worry." She waved her hand nonchalantly. "I had it all figured out." We took the elevator to the 7th floor. Adeline proudly opened the door to the apartment, letting me in. I froze on the threshold, stunned. The apartment was gorgeous, spacious, with modern furniture and panoramic windows overlooking the city. Designer renovations, expensive appliances, stylish accessories. Everything looked like from the pages of a magazine. Adeline. I was having trouble finding the words. "It's amazing, but, how much does it cost to rent a place like this?" "Enough," she smiled, walking into the living room. "But it's worth it, isn't it?" I followed slowly, looking around the space. The living room flowed into an open-plan kitchen with marble countertops and modern appliances. Farther down was a hallway that led to what appeared to be the bedrooms. "I'll show you the rest." Adeline took my hand and led me through the apartment. We walked past the master bedroom with a huge bed and its own bathroom, past the study with an ergonomic chair and a designer desk. Where, where would my room be?" I asked when we'd gone around the entire apartment, and the second bedroom still hadn't appeared. Adeline froze, turning to me with an expression I couldn't read. "You know, Mom, I wanted to talk to you about this." My heart clenched with a sudden misgiving. "About what?" "I think we both need space," she began, avoiding my eyes. "We've been living together too long. I think you should find your own place." The room shook under my feet. "My own place?" I repeated, not believing my ears. "Adeline, we just sold our house. I only have $80,000 left. You can't even buy a studio in Fullerton with that money. You could rent something, or move to a cheaper neighborhood." She finally looked at me. "Mom, I'm 38. I want to live alone." "After I gave you the house?" My voice shook. "After I sold the only thing I had to save you from the problems you created for yourself? I'm grateful for that, I really am." I couldn't hear any gratitude in her voice. "But that doesn't mean we have to live together until you die." I recoiled as if she'd hit me. "Where's my furniture?" I asked, looking around the apartment, where nothing was mine. All new, modern, foreign. "I left it in storage." Adeline shrugged. "It didn't fit in anyway." "And my personal belongings? Boxes of photos, books? They're in there too. I paid for a month's storage. In that time, you can find a place to live and take them." I looked at my daughter and didn't recognize her. This cold, calculating woman couldn't be my Adeline, the girl I'd raised with so much love, for whom I'd sacrificed everything. "You planned all this," I said quietly, "when you offered to sell the house." "Don't be silly," she frowned. "I'm really in trouble. The debt was real, and I'm grateful that you helped me. But now we both have to move on." Move on? I felt anger growing inside, an emotion I rarely allowed myself. "You foreclosed on my house, took most of my money, and now you're kicking me out the door? At 67 years old?" "Don't be dramatic." Her voice became irritated. "You have money. You can find a place to live. You've always been practical. A strange numbness swept over me. The shock of the betrayal was so intense that I felt almost no pain, just the cold realization that my own daughter, the one I'd lived for all these years, was just using me. "When do you want me to leave?" I asked in a colorless voice. Adeline cast a quick glance at her watch. "Actually, I have a meeting in an hour. I thought you'd look around the apartment and then leave. We could meet tomorrow or the day after, when you find a place to live." I froze, looking at her. I'm not even being offered a place to sleep. I'm being kicked out right now, without even letting me recover from losing my home. "Where are my things?" I asked, trying to speak calmly. "The ones I brought with me, my suitcase." "Oh, I put it in the hallway." Adeline headed for the door. "There, see?" The small suitcase with the most essential things was standing by the front door. She hadn't even brought it into the apartment. She knew I wouldn't stay. I walked over and picked it up, feeling something inside me break the last thread that connected me to my daughter. When I turned to her, I saw not the child I had raised, but a stranger, an indifferent man. "Why, Adeline?" was all I could ask. She shrugged with a slight smile. "It's better for both of us. You've been clinging to me for too long. Maybe now you'll finally have a life of your own." My hand rose involuntarily to my heart. Something inside seemed to physically tear at those words. "Clinging?" I asked again. "Is that how you perceive my love? My care? The 35 years I've devoted to you?" "Don't start." She waved her hand irritably. "I didn't ask you to sacrifice yourself. It was your choice." I stared at her in silence, realizing that any words were useless. This woman is incapable of understanding what it means to love, to care, to be grateful. And maybe it was my fault. I couldn't teach her that. "You're right," I finally said. "It was my choice, and I'm making a choice now, too." I picked up my suitcase and headed for the door. "Well, you've done a big favor for me. Now get out." Adeline suddenly threw me in the back with unexpected gloating in her voice. I stopped but didn't turn around. I didn't want her to see the tears welling up in my eyes. "Goodbye, Adeline," I said quietly and walked out, closing the door carefully behind me. On the elevator ride down, I leaned against the wall, feeling my legs shake. I couldn't believe this was really happening. Yesterday, I was saying goodbye to the house where I'd spent 30 years, comforting myself with the thought that I had a daughter, my family, my support. And today I was without a home and without a daughter. I walked outside, squinting against the bright sun. What now? Where to go? All I had was a debit card with the money from the sale of my house, a small suitcase with the bare essentials, and 67 years under my belt. The first thing I did was find the nearest bench and sat down, trying to gather my thoughts. Panic was coming over me in waves. I'm homeless. I'm alone. I'm old. "No," I said to myself. "You're not old. You're experienced. And you have money. That's something." I pulled out my phone, started looking for the nearest hotels. I couldn't afford an expensive hotel, but I couldn't stay on the street. I found a small motel a couple miles away, reasonably priced. Called a cab. On the way to the motel, I sat with my suitcase clutched to me as the only thing I had left. Tears streamed down my cheeks, but I didn't wipe them away. For perhaps the first time in decades, I allowed myself to just feel the pain without trying to be strong for someone else. The motel was exactly what I expected, a shabby motel with shabby furniture and dim lighting. But it was clean, and the receptionist, a tired woman about my age, was surprisingly sympathetic. "Is there a problem?" she asked, noticing my red eyes. "Family," I answered briefly. She nodded understandingly. "I know how it is. My son is the same way. Only takes, never gives." I smiled weakly. We understood each other without words. Room 312, second floor up the stairs. She handed me the key. If you need anything, I'm at the front desk until 10. Thank you. I thanked her sincerely. I went up to my room, locked the door, put my suitcase on the worn chair, and sank down on the bed. The springs creaked under my weight. For the first time all day, I had time to realize what had happened. My daughter, my only family, the person I'd lived for all these years, had thrown me out of her life like a worthless thing. After giving her almost everything I had, the pain was unbearable. I curled up on someone else's bed and let the sobs shake my body. I cried for the lost years, for the sacrifices that were in vain, for the love that was unrequited. I cried for the house where a piece of my soul remained, for a future that now looked frighteningly empty. When the tears finally dried up, the grief was replaced by a strange numbness. I lay staring up at the spiderweb-like cracked ceiling, trying to figure out where I had gone wrong. What had I done wrong in raising Adeline? When did she become so selfish, so callous? Or had she always been like this, and I just refused to see? It was starting to get dark outside. I got up and washed my face with cold water, trying not to look at my reflection in the cracked mirror. I took my nightgown out of my suitcase and changed. I needed to eat something, but I didn't have the energy to go out and find a cafe. There was a small refrigerator in the room empty, except for a bottle of water, for which they'd probably charge me $30. I drank the water without thinking about the price. What did it matter now? Back on the bed, I pulled out my phone. I almost hoped to see a message or a missed call from Adeline. Maybe she'd come to her senses, realized what she'd done was awful. But the screen was blank. No calls, no messages. Of course, I thought. She got what she wanted. Why would she bother with me? I opened my browser, started searching for rental properties. The prices made me wince. Even a modest studio in Fullerton was asking more than I could afford with the money I had left. I'd have to look for something cheaper, perhaps in another neighborhood. But that would be tomorrow. Right now, I didn't have the energy to continue. I turned off the light and lay there, listening to the muffled sounds of the motel, someone's footsteps in the hallway, the hum of the old air conditioner, the distant sound of the TV in the next room. So foreign, so far from the cozy sounds of my lost home. Sleep wouldn't come. My mind whirled with thoughts, memories, regrets. I remembered Adeline as a little girl, how she laughed when I tossed her in the air, how she snuggled up to me during a thunderstorm, how she proudly showed me her first drawings. Where is that little girl? When did she disappear, giving way to the cold, calculating woman who kicked me out of her apartment today? I turned on my side, staring at the beam of light from the street lamp shining through the gap in the curtains. For the first time in years, maybe the first time since I became a mother, I was truly alone. No one was depending on me. No one was waiting for my help, my support, my sacrifice. A strange thought crossed my mind. Maybe there is some liberation in that. Maybe now that all ties are severed, I can finally live for myself. But what does it mean to live for yourself? At 67, when you're left without a home, without a family, with limited means? I didn't know the answer. All I knew was that I would have to get up in the morning and somehow get on with my life. Find a place to live, get my stuff out of storage, decide what to do with the rest of my life. And tonight I could just lie in the dark and grieve for everything I'd lost. My home, my daughter. About decades wasted on a man who didn't even look back when I left. I woke up to the sound of rain drumming on the eaves. Outside the motel window, it was gray and dank. The weather accurately reflected my condition. My body ached from the uncomfortable bed, and the room was cold. I sat up, trying to collect my thoughts. Yesterday's events came back to me with renewed intensity. The house had been sold. The daughter betrayed. I'm homeless at 67. No, I said firmly out loud. I will not think like this. The voice in the empty room sounded suddenly resolute. I got up and washed my face with ice-cold water from the faucet. In the mirror, a woman with gray hair and tired eyes looked back at me, but there was something new in her gaze, a steely gleam I hadn't seen in a long time. I'd been an accountant all my life. I'm used to solving problems, finding a way out of difficult situations. Now I need to apply those skills to my own life. First, I need to figure out if Adeline really gave the money to Vince. What if she lied about that too? What if she kept all the money and never paid off the debt? I remembered that a few weeks ago, when I'd been going through Adeline's papers, I'd come across a strange business card, a black card with an address only, no name or company. I hadn't paid much attention to it at the time. Now I realized it was probably an underground casino. Opening my suitcase, I found a small notebook where I kept important information. Yes, this is it. I wrote down the address, deciding to check with my daughter to find out what the place was. Of course, I never asked. I glanced at the address, the industrial part of town, the warehouse and wholesale district, not the safest place for an older woman, but there was no choice. After getting dressed and tidying up as much as I could in a motel setting, I went down to the front desk. The same receptionist from yesterday looked at me sympathetically. "You look better," she said. "Have you found a solution to your problems?" "I'm working on it," I replied. "Can I leave my suitcase with you for the day? I'll be back tonight." "Sure," she accepted my suitcase. "Good luck to you." I hailed a cab. While I waited, I looked at my bank account through the app. The money was there, $80,420.50. Not a lot to start a new life at my age, but enough not to be on the street anytime soon. The cab came quickly. I gave the address, and the driver, a young guy with an earring in his ear, looked at me strangely. "Are you sure, ma'am? This isn't the nicest neighborhood." "I'm sure," I said firmly. "I have a meeting there." He shrugged his shoulders and drove off. I stared out the window at the city as I drove, trying to collect my thoughts. What would I say to Vince? How would I explain my appearance? I wasn't even sure I could get inside the casino, let alone meet the owner. But the alternative was even worse, sitting in a motel, bemoaning my fate while the money slowly melted away. The cab pulled up outside an unremarkable gray concrete building. No signage, just a number above the door. "Are you sure you want to get off here?" the driver asked, clearly concerned. "Yes," I paid and got out, trying to look more confident than I felt. The neighborhood was really unpleasant. Abandoned warehouses, graffiti on the walls, trash on the sidewalks. A large man in a black jacket stood at the entrance to the building, watching the street carefully. I took a deep breath and approached him. "Good afternoon." My voice sounded surprisingly steady. "I need to talk to Vince." The man gave me a skeptical look from head to toe, an older woman in modest clothes, her purse clutched tightly to her side. I must have looked ridiculous in this place. "Vince isn't here," he said. "And you have the wrong address, lady. It's an auto parts warehouse." "Don't lie to me, young man." I looked him straight in the eye. "I know what's here. My daughter Adeline Hollister recently owed Vince a large sum of money. I need to make sure the money reaches him." Something changed in his gaze at the mention of Adeline's name. "Wait here," he mumbled and disappeared out the door. I stood in the drizzle with my arms wrapped around myself. My nerves were frayed, but I couldn't back down. 5 minutes later, the guard returned. "Follow me." He opened the door, letting me inside. We walked down the dimly lit hallway, then down the stairs. I heard muffled voices, clinking glasses, distant laughter. The casino was clearly open even during daylight hours. The guard led me past the main room, where I glimpsed gaming tables, a bar, and a small stage. We stopped in front of an inconspicuous door that was unmarked. "Wait here." He knocked, then opened the door and said something to whoever was inside. A moment later, the door opened, and a man of about 45 stood before me. A trim man, with a gray streak in his dark hair, wearing an expensive suit. His face was hard, with deep wrinkles around his mouth, but his eyes, dark brown, almost black, were unexpectedly lively and attentive. "Mrs. Hollister?" He looked at me appraisingly. "I'm Vince. Come in." The office was unexpectedly cozy leather furniture, bookshelves, expensive alcohol in a crystal decanter. Nothing flashy or vulgar, as I'd expected from an underground casino owner. "Have a seat." Vince pointed to the chair across from his desk. "Brian said you were interested in your daughter's payment?" "Yes." I sat down, trying to keep my hands from trembling. "Adeline was supposed to pay you $230,000 from the sale of my house. I wanted to make sure she really did." Vince raised an eyebrow. "Your house? Interesting. She told me she'd sold her apartment." I grinned bitterly. "Of course she did. Adeline never owned real estate. It was my house, where I lived for 30 years. I sold it to save her from the trouble she'd gotten herself into." Vince looked at me carefully, then opened his laptop, checking something. "Yeah, the payment came in 3 days ago, the full amount, including interest." He closed the laptop. "May I ask why you're here, Mrs. Hollister?" "The debt's cleared. The case is closed." I folded my hands in my lap, trying to control my emotions. "I don't know, Mr. Vince. I guess I needed to make sure that the sacrifice wasn't in vain, that my daughter was actually using the money for its intended purpose and not lying to me." "And how did you find this place?" He sounded mildly curious. "I happened to see the address in her papers." I shrugged. "I'm an accountant. I'm used to noticing details." Vince nodded, as if deciding something for himself. Then he poured the amber liquid from the decanter into 2 glasses. "Whiskey?" He held one out to me. "You look like you need it." I rarely drank hard liquor, but I accepted the glass without objection. I took a small sip, the whiskey burning my throat, but spreading a pleasant warmth through my body. "Tell me, Mrs. Hollister, what happened after you sold the house?" Vince asked suddenly. And I did. The words flowed on their own, the way Adeline had rented the luxury apartment, the way she'd invited me to see it, the way she'd cynically kicked me out the door. About the night in the motel, about the dashed hopes, about the 35 years of love and care that ended in betrayal. Vince listened without interrupting. His face remained impenetrable, but there was something in his eyes, a shadow I couldn't quite put my finger on. "What do you plan to do now?" he asked when I was done. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "Find a place to live, get my stuff out of storage, try to move on with my life. I have some money left over from selling the house." "How much?" "80,000. I saw no point in hiding it. "Not much to start a new life at my age." Vince stared at me in silence. Then he stood up and walked to the window overlooking the back of the casino. "My mother died 5 years ago," he said suddenly. "She never approved of what I was doing, but she loved me no matter what, supported me even when everyone else turned their backs." He turned to me. "A mother is a sacred thing, Mrs. Hollister. Even in our business, there are some things you can't forgive." Something in his tone made me tense. "I didn't come here to complain, Mr. Vince. I didn't come to ask for help. I just wanted to make sure that the money from my house went toward paying off the debt, not toward new furniture for Adeline." "The debt is paid off," he nodded. "But the story you've told, it's unpleasant, very unpleasant." He returned to the table, drumming his fingers thoughtfully on the tabletop. "Tell me, Mrs. Hollister, how would you feel about teaching your daughter a lesson?" I froze, not knowing how to respond. What do you mean? I mean, Vince said slowly, that such behavior deserves consequences. Even in my world, there's a sense of honor, a sense of duty to parents. What your daughter did, selling your house and then throwing you out on the street, that's out of line. Do you want to hurt her? My voice shook. No. Vince shook his head. Not physical harm. But she'll learn a lesson. I promise you that. I didn't know what to feel. Part of me was still protective of Adeline. It was instinct, built up over decades of motherhood. But the other part, the part that had been betrayed and abandoned, longed for justice. What's going to happen to you, Mrs. Hollister? Vince asked, interrupting my musings. Where do you plan to live? In a motel for now, I shrugged. I'll look for a cheap apartment. Maybe I'll go back to being an accountant, though at my age it would be hard to find a good one. Vince stared at me thoughtfully for a few long seconds. Then he nodded decisively at something in his mind. I'll tell you what, Mrs. Hollister. Go back to your motel and pack your things. My man will meet you at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. I have a proposition for you that might interest you. What kind of proposition? I'm a little wary. You'll find out tomorrow, he answered evasively. Let's put it this way. I need a good accountant for my legitimate business, and you need a job and a place to live. I think we can be useful to each other. I stared at him, not knowing what to say. Trust a man who runs an underground casino? A man who promises to teach my daughter a lesson? But then again, what other options did I have? Don't worry, Mrs. Hollister. Vince seemed to read my mind. I'm not offering you anything illegal. My chain of car washes is a perfectly legitimate business. You won't have to deal with a casino or anything like that. Why are you doing this? I asked you directly. Why do you want to help me? Vince stood up, signaling the end of our meeting. Let's just say I have my own issues with ungrateful children, and I respect mothers who sacrifice everything for their offspring. He gave me his hand. See you tomorrow, Mrs. Hollister. Brian will see you out. I shook his hand. It was dry and firm, and stood up. Thank you for meeting me, Mr. Vince. He nodded. And, Mrs. Hollister, don't worry about your daughter. She won't be physically harmed, but she'll get a lesson she'll remember for a long time. I left the office with mixed feelings. A security guard named Brian escorted me through the casino floor to the exit. On the way, I noticed several people nodding respectfully to him and to me as his companion. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the sky remained gray. Brian hailed a cab for me. Mr. Vince said to tell you, there will be a black sedan outside your motel at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. The driver's name is Tony. Thank you. I nodded, still not sure if I was doing the right thing. The cab came quickly. On the way back to the motel, I thought about the strange encounter and Vince's unexpected offer. Part of me was afraid to get involved with a man from the underworld, but the other part, the part that had been betrayed by her own daughter, felt a strange satisfaction at the thought of Adeline getting the punishment she deserved for her betrayal. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in a long time, I had hope that my story wasn't over. I returned to the motel in the evening, feeling a strange mixture of anxiety and hope. The conversation with Vince had been on my mind, his sudden understanding, his promise of help, and the rigid determination with which he'd talked about teaching Adeline a lesson. I didn't know whether to worry about my daughter or to feel grim satisfaction at the thought of justice to come. Despite my mental tossing, I felt hungry for the first time in 2 days and forced myself to go to the small cafe across the street from the motel. There, over a cup of hot soup, I tried to put the situation in perspective, as I always did when I had to make an important decision. On the one hand, getting involved with a man like Vince was risky. I had no idea what his legitimate business was or what was behind the polite job offer. On the other hand, I had little choice. Finding a good job at my age was almost impossible, and the money I had left wouldn't last long. Back in my room, I lay on my bed, staring at the ceiling. I couldn't get the image of Vince out of my head, his scrutinizing eyes, the tense line of his mouth, the look on his face when he talked about his mother. There was a sense of danger in him, certainly, but also something almost noble? A strange word for a man of his profession. And yet, my phone beeped a message from Adeline. Mom, are you okay? Just wanted to make sure you had a place to stay. I stared at the screen, feeling a wave of bitterness rising inside. Now she was worried, after kicking me out the door with one suitcase? I didn't answer. For the first time in my life, I deliberately ignored a message from my daughter, even though my whole motherly being was screaming for a response. But something in me had changed over the days. Something had broken and hardened at the same time. I woke up this morning with a firm decision to accept Vince's offer, no matter how unexpected. I had no illusions. He wasn't a selfless benefactor. He probably needed a loyal accountant for money laundering or some other kind of fraud. But in my situation, I had no choice. I had breakfast at the same cafe, packed my things, and was about to leave when the phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number. Mrs. Hollister? There was a voice I recognized. It was Vince. I hope I didn't wake you. No, I'm up, I answered, surprised by his call. Good. I'm calling to let you know that I'm meeting your daughter at noon today. I think we need to clear some things up. My heart ached. You're not gonna hurt her, are you? My voice trembled, revealing the anxiety I was trying to suppress. Like I said, Mrs. Hollister, there will be no physical harm. Vince's voice was calm. But the conversation will be impressive. Don't worry, I'll let you know how it went by tonight. We can meet at the office of my car wash chain at 6 o'clock tonight. Tony will pick you up. I agreed, even though I was worried about my daughter. No matter how awful Adeline's behavior, she was still my only child. The day dragged on for an agonizingly long time. I tried to distract myself. I went to the nearest mall, bought a few necessary things, sat in the park, watching the children playing. But my thoughts kept returning to Adeline and Vince's upcoming visit. At 6 o'clock sharp, I was at the Shine and Clean office. The receptionist ushered me into Vince's office, where he was waiting, looking through some documents. Mrs. Hollister. He stood up to greet me. Have a seat. Would you like some coffee? Or maybe some tea? I declined, too excited to think about drinks. How was your meeting with Adeline? I asked, barely sitting down. Vince looked at me carefully, as if gauging how much I was ready to hear. The meeting was productive, he said finally. Your daughter was surprised by my visit, but she quickly understood the reason for it. I remained silent, waiting for him to continue. You see, Mrs. Hollister, I told her that I'd met you, that I knew about the house you sold to save her, and how she thanked you for that sacrifice. Vince stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the evening city. You know, I rarely talk about my personal life, but I made an exception with your daughter. Told her about my mother, the way she sold the house to get me out of prison, and how I vowed never to forget that sacrifice. He turned to me, and I saw a strange mixture of pain and determination in his eyes. My mother grew up in Sicily, Mrs. Hollister. She instilled certain values in me. One of them is family above all else. Another is that respect for my mother is sacred. I felt an uneasiness growing inside. What did you tell Adeline? The truth, Vince answered simply. That she was under my special supervision from this day forward. That if anything happens to you, anything, I'll know who to blame. He sat back down at the table, folding his hands in front of him. I also explained to her that you would be working for me, and that if she ever refused to help you if you needed it, the consequences would be unpleasant. You threatened her. It wasn't a question, it was a statement. I was drawing boundaries, Vince corrected. In my world, Mrs. Hollister, words have weight only when there are real consequences behind them. I remained silent, trying to make sense of the situation. Part of me was grateful for Vince's intercession. The other part, the maternal part, was worried about how Adeline was handling this visit. Don't worry. Vince seemed to read my mind. She wasn't physically harmed, but she'd gotten a reminder of important things she seemed to have forgotten. How did she react? I couldn't help but ask. Vince smiled slightly, a cold, calculating smile that reminded me of who he really was, despite the business suit and polite manners. Scared, remorseful, promised to make it up to him, but they were words of fear, not sincere remorse. He shrugged. Time will tell how deeply the lesson has penetrated. But one thing I do know is that she won't bother you again unless you want her to. Vince changed the subject abruptly. Now, about business. I'm offering you the position of chief accountant for my chain of car washes. The pay will be good, and the work won't be too onerous considering your age. I nodded, still considering the information about my meeting with Adeline. As for housing, Vince began, but I interrupted him. I think I can find something inexpensive, I said, not wanting to owe him more than necessary. We'll discuss it tomorrow, he said diplomatically. For now, Tony will drive you back to the motel. Get some rest, Mrs. Hollister. Tomorrow will be a new day. When I left the office, my heart was heavy. I didn't know if I'd done the right thing in letting Vince talk to Adeline. But part of me, the part of me that had been betrayed and thrown away, felt oddly satisfied. I couldn't sleep for a long time that night, wondering what was happening to Adeline at that moment. And she, I learned later, hadn't slept either. Vince's visit had left Adeline in a state of shock. When he and his men left, she sat on the couch for a long time, shaking with fear and the realization of the situation she'd put herself in. Her luxurious apartment, which had seemed a symbol of her new free life in the morning, now felt like a golden cage. Every luxury item bought with the money from the sale of my house now seemed like a mute rebuke to her. She tried to call me several times, but I didn't answer. She sent messages that I read but ignored. For the first time in her life, Adeline was faced with a situation where her problems weren't solved by a simple phone call to her mother. One of Vince's men, not Brian, but the other one, whose name was Cal, particularly scared her. He didn't say much, but his look as he scrutinized her hands in the picture was more eloquent than any threats. Beautiful hands, thin fingers, probably very important to a designer, right? Those words echoed in her head, causing an almost physical pain in the joints of her fingers. She knew the reputation of Vince and his men. They didn't throw words around. And if they hinted that they might cripple her hands if she hurt me again, they'd do it. By midnight, Adeline's fear had turned to despair. She realized for the first time in years what she'd done, not only by throwing me out on the street after everything I'd done for her, but by associating with people like Vince because of her passion for gambling. Somewhere in the back of her mind, maybe she was beginning to realize that it was her selfishness and irresponsibility that had led to the loss of the home I loved so much and the destruction of our family. But it was too late. At dawn, after a sleepless night, Adeline sat on the balcony of her luxurious apartment, looking out over the waking city. She didn't know what was in store for her next, but one thing was clear. The life she had planned after getting out of debt and out of my care would no longer be as serene as she had hoped. And I, unaware of her agony, fell asleep in my motel room, feeling, for the first time in a long time, that justice had been served, albeit in such a strange, unexpected way. The week after Vince met Adeline had passed in a strange state of suspended animation for me. I continued to stay at the motel, though Vince insisted that I move to a more comfortable hotel. I refused that offer. I didn't want to owe more than I had to. Every day, Tony picked me up and drove me to the shine and clean office, where I familiarized myself with the chain's accounting department and met with the staff, gradually immersing myself in my new job. Vince was professional, but with a warmth I suspected he rarely showed. Calls and texts came in from Adeline. "Mom, we need to talk. Please respond. I'm worried about you." I read them, but I didn't respond. I wasn't ready. The wound of betrayal was still too fresh. On the 8th day, Vince invited me into his office at the end of the day. "Mrs. Hollister, I have a surprise for you," he said as I entered. His usually stern face softened. "Have a seat." I sat down across from him, feeling slightly uneasy. I'd learned enough about his business this week to know that the car wash chain was indeed legitimate, but it served as a convenient way to launder money from casinos and possibly other illegal businesses. My job didn't yet require involvement in questionable operations, but I knew I'd face an ethical dilemma sooner or later. "You're doing a good job," Vince continued. "The staff speaks favorably of you. You've gotten up to speed quickly, despite difficult circumstances." "Thank you," I nodded. "It's a good distraction." "I understand." He opened his desk drawer and pulled out an envelope. "But living in a motel is not the answer. You need a home, Mrs. Hollister." He put the envelope in front of me. I was in no hurry to take it. "What's this? Look for yourself." His eyes flashed with something like the eagerness of a child about to hand over a present. I opened the envelope. Inside were the keys and the deed to the Fullerton apartment. I looked up at Vince, not understanding. "Is this for me?" My voice shook. "Yes." He nodded. "It's in a quiet neighborhood near the park, small but comfortable, fully furnished with a balcony. You mentioned that you'd always wanted a balcony." I stared at the paperwork, not believing my eyes. It was a deed of gift. The apartment passed into my ownership with no conditions or obligations. "I can't accept this," I said quietly, though part of me desperately wanted to agree. "It's too generous. A mother should have a roof over her head," Vince said firmly. "That's out of the question, Mrs. Hollister." Something in his tone, a mixture of authority and genuine concern, reminded me that, despite his business suit and polite manners, I was sitting in front of a man who was used to getting what he wanted. "Why?" I decided to ask. "Why are you doing this for me?" Vince stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the street. When he spoke, his voice was quieter than usual. "When my mother was dying, I sat by her bedside. She knew what I was really up to, though I tried to hide the worst from her." He turned to me. "Do you know what she said to me before she died?" I shook my head. She said, "Vincent, you chose the wrong road, but you've always been a good son, always took care of me. If there's anything that can atone for your sins before God, it's your attitude toward your mother." He paused. "I don't believe in God, Mrs. Hollister, but in my mother's words, I do." I was silent, touched by his frankness. "Do you understand now?" Vince asked. "I couldn't save my mother, but maybe by helping you, I'm doing what she would have wanted me to do. Consider it my redemption, if you will." I nodded slowly, accepting his explanation and his gift. "Thank you," I said sincerely. "I don't know how to repay you for such kindness." "Just do a good job." He returned to the table, and his voice became businesslike again. "Speaking of work, after studying your resume and seeing how you handle tasks, I decided to offer you a more suitable position, not administrator, but chief accountant of the network." "Chief accountant?" I was surprised. but it's a big responsibility. One that you're perfectly capable of carrying, Vince said confidently. You have 30 years of experience, and more importantly, you're someone I can trust. I knew what that meant. He expected loyalty in more than just legal matters. But in my situation, I didn't have to choose. Besides, I was grateful. I agree, I said. Thank you. For the apartment, for the job, for everything. Don't thank me. Vince smiled slightly. Just prove that I wasn't wrong about you. Tony drove me to my new apartment that afternoon. It was exactly as Vince had described, small but cozy, on the third floor of a building overlooking the park, fully furnished with modern appliances, freshly renovated, and, most importantly, the balcony I'd always wanted. Your things from storage have been delivered, Tony said, pointing to the boxes in the living room. If you need help unpacking? No thanks, I smiled. I'll be fine on my own. When he left, I walked slowly around the apartment, unable to believe my happiness. After the horror of losing my home, betraying my daughter, and nights in a motel, it seemed almost miraculous. I opened the doors to the balcony and stepped out, breathing in the fresh evening air. Down below was a small park with a playground, mothers with strollers, children on swings, elderly couples on benches. Ordinary, quiet life. At that moment, a strange feeling came over me, a mixture of sadness for my lost home and gratitude for a new beginning. I cried on that balcony, mourning a broken relationship with my daughter and 35 years of life wasted on a man who had betrayed me so easily. But those tears were cleansing. The next 6 months flew by in a new rhythm of life. I got to grips with my job as chief accountant, gradually reorganizing the car wash chain's financial system, making it more efficient. Vince was pleased that his legitimate business was thriving and his money laundering schemes were more sophisticated and safer, though I tried not to think about that side of things. My apartment had become a home. I arranged photos, hung paintings I'd collected over the years, planted flowers on the balcony. I drank coffee every morning, looking out at the park below, and felt a strange calm. Adeline kept trying to contact me, calling, texting, coming to the shine and clean office twice, but Vince had given instructions not to let her in. Finally, she wrote a letter, a real paper letter, which was so uncharacteristic of her. Dear Mom, she wrote, I realize that you don't want to see me or talk to me, and I do not blame you. What I did is unforgivable. I was selfish, ungrateful, and cruel. You gave me everything, your time, your love, your care, and in the end, even your home. And I repaid you with betrayal. I don't know if you'll ever forgive me. Probably not. But I want you to know that I realized my mistake. And the other thing is, I'm scared, afraid of Vince and his men. They've made it clear that if I hurt you again, the consequences will be dire. But it's not just fear. I'm truly sorry. If you ever want to reconnect, I'll wait. If not, I'll understand. You deserve peace and happiness after all I've done to you. Love, Adeline. I read the letter several times, not knowing what to feel. Part of me, the maternal, instinctive part, wanted to call my daughter immediately, to tell her that all was forgiven. But the other part, the part that remembered the cold, get out, and the night in the motel, couldn't get past the pain. In the end, I didn't respond. Maybe in time I would, but not now, when I was just starting to find myself anew. Vince had never asked about my relationship with Adeline directly, but I knew he was aware of her attempts to contact me. Sometimes, when we were discussing work matters, he'd wondered in passing how I was feeling, how I was adjusting to my new life, and I felt that his concern was genuine as a man in his profession can be. One day, almost 6 months after I'd started working for Vince, he invited me to dinner. Not a business dinner, but an almost friendly one. We sat in a quiet restaurant, away from prying eyes, and talked not about work, but about life. "How are you getting along in your new apartment?" Vince asked, pouring wine into glasses. "It's great," I replied sincerely. "It's exactly what I'd always dreamed of, a small, cozy space that's all mine." "Glad to hear it." He smiled, and his usually hard face softened. "You deserve it, Laurel." It was the first time he'd ever called me by my first name. "And your daughter?" he asked cautiously. "Do you two communicate?" I shook my head. "No, she's trying to contact me, but I'm not ready." "And maybe you never will be." Vince nodded understandingly. "Some things can't be forgiven, no matter how hard we try." "It's not about forgiveness," I said thoughtfully. "It's about trust. I can forgive Adeline for what she did, but I can never trust her again." "That's a wise position." Vince raised his glass. "To new beginnings." "To new beginnings," I repeated, clinking glasses with his. We continued the dinner, talking about books, movies, travel, the usual topics that normal people talked about. And for a moment, I'd almost forgotten who Vince really was, a man whose business included an underground casino and probably other illegal enterprises. A man who could scare my daughter enough to make her afraid to even come near my new home. But wasn't this the same man who gave me a roof over my head, a job, respect? Didn't he treat me with more dignity than my own daughter? As I rode home in the cab, Vince had insisted I not go with Tony, but call a car, like a normal person. I pondered the irony of fate. I'd lived my whole life right working, paying taxes, raising my daughter, taking care of the house, and as a result, I was left with nothing, betrayed by my own child. And now I was working for a man whose activities were, to put it mildly, in the gray area of the law. And it was thanks to him that I had a home, a job, respect, and even something resembling friendship. At home, I stepped out onto the balcony, as I did every evening. The park below was quiet and empty, just a lonely old man walking his dog under the streetlights. My gaze fell on the pots of flowers I had recently planted, a small piece of life that I was now solely responsible for. In that moment, I realized that for the first time in years, I felt truly free. Free from the endless responsibility for Adeline, from the constant worry about her future, from having to sacrifice my own desires for her. Yes, my new life was strange, unexpected, with questionable moral compromises, but it was my life, the life I had chosen. I took a deep breath of the night air, feeling strangely peaceful. I may never be able to repair my relationship with my daughter. I might have to live with the pain of this breakup for the rest of my life. But I had a home, a job that I loved and excelled at, and most surprisingly, I had a protector in the form of Vince, a man who by all standards should be feared by me, but instead earned my respect and gratitude. Ironic, really. A man from the underworld had shown more humanity than my own daughter. I grinned bitterly at the thought, but without the same old pain. It was time to move on. Life went on, strange, unexpected, with its ups and downs. And at this moment, standing on the balcony of my new apartment, I felt ready for this life, ready to accept it for what it was, with all its contradictions, complexities, and rare moments of beauty, like this quiet evening in the park. I have finally found inner peace, and surprisingly, I found it in the most unexpected place, in the company of a man I should otherwise have feared, and in the breaking of a bond I considered sacred. This was my new reality, and for the first time in a long time, I was ready to face it with an open heart and a clear mind, without the weight of past commitments and disappointments. Free, free at last.